Well, welcome everyone to Connect with Control M. As you mentioned, my name is Eric Rudy, and I am a technical support analyst with BMC Software. I work in the Control M support group and have been with BMC and working with Control M for about 14 years now. As she mentioned, today we'll be discussing Control M for SAP, specifically version 700. This demo is in version 8, so we'll give you a chance to get a little bit of a look of the feel of version 8 if you haven't seen it before. With version 8, Control M for SAP comes pre-installed on the local agent where Control M server is installed, and To speed things along, I've installed FixPack 2 already here. So as we saw in the implementation steps, the first, after you install, we need to run that CTM get CM command. What that really does here is, again, lets Control M Server and the configuration manager that you see behind us here know what applications are installed on the particular agent that we just installed to. So in our case, this is a CTM QProd. We're going to check and see all the different application types on this particular agent. And rather than just viewing them, we want to get them to make sure that the CCM is updated with that. So as we see here on the second line, SAP is indeed installed, and it has 700 FixPack 2. I mentioned the JCO files, the APIs that we use to link to SAP. Those we need to download directly from SAP. BMC does not provide those. This would come from your SAP administrator, and the JCO files are based upon the operating system that you're installing to. So in our case, we've got Red Hat Linux here. In this SAP, CMSAP XE directory, we have a subdirectory called SAP JCO. So I downloaded the jar file and library for Red Hat Linux here. To make sure then we're communicating with that JCO properly, we want to run the SAP CMBE command and pass it the JCO option. So this will tell us what version of the JCO we have installed and let us know that we're properly communicating with it. We've got the right one downloaded for this platform. So in our case here, we see that JCO 309 is installed. This is the latest that comes from SAP and definitely what we recommend installing. Also want to check and make sure that the Java connector itself is running as well. That's a SAP CMBE command. And this time we're going to pass it the status option. On our example here, we should see, and we do see that it's running on this local host. So it's exactly what we want to see. Now then we can move over to the configuration manager. And the line that I've got highlighted here, indeed, we see that we've got SAP installed. And at the far right, we see that 700 FixPack 2 is what we're communicating with. So that tells us that the CTM get CM command worked, and we're good to go. Wanted to talk about some of the configuration options. Again, the last step then in our implementation to get started is to create a connection profile. Again, for 700 and earlier of Enterprise Manager, this is known as an account. So I'm going to go ahead and I've got a couple here now, but I want to go ahead and create a new one just to give you a feel for what the different options are. The profile name is going to be it's a logical name based upon what you want to set it as. So it might be something as just letting you know what SAP system you're connecting to, or possibly the different types of jobs you're going to run on that SAP system. SAP gives us different ways to log into their systems. We can log in as a specific application server or a group. This type of information really is going to come from your SAP administrator. They're going to let you know how they want you to log into their SAP system. For the purpose of this demo, we're going to log in as a specific application server. And then finally, if you want to encrypt the information that goes between Control M and SAP, you'd want to go ahead and select this Activate Secure Network Communication. There are going to be some additional implementation steps beyond just selecting this. All that information is documented in the Control M for SAP Administrator Guide. We're not going to encrypt that here for this demo. So because I chose a specific application server, I'm going to get parameters here that are applicable to that selection. Again, this type of information really is going to come from your SAP administrator as far as what specific host you're going to log into. So I'll go ahead and plug that in for the system that we're going to connect to. The login information, this is the user that's going to be running the jobs, on the SAP system. So there are certain authorizations that user needs to have. There are quite a few of them, and it depends upon the types of jobs that you're going to be running, and this, again, is documented in the Control M for SAP Administrator Guide. The language is pretty self-explanatory. The SAP application version really determines is based upon, again, the types of jobs you're going to run on that system. So if you're going to run R3 jobs only, you'd select the R3 option. If you're going to run business warehouse, BW jobs, you'd select the appropriate option based upon that SAP system you're connecting to. If you're also going to run R3 and BW, you could select BW. So we'll select BW3 here. I mentioned the function modules that we use, the APIs that we use to connect to SAP. This is known as XBP. XBP3 is the latest version of their function modules, and definitely is what we recommend using if your SAP system supports it. If for some reason it doesn't, at the end of this connection profile when we test, if that SAP system did not support it, then we'd get a message back saying that it wasn't supported, and you could come back here and set it back to a lower version such as XBP2, hopefully not XBP1. On our next slide, the SAP response timeout. As I mentioned earlier, we make a request to SAP. We log in, we submit a job, we track a job. Once we make that request, we have to wait for a response. So we're not going to wait forever. At some point, we're going to time out if SAP does not respond for some reason. So the default here is 180 seconds, 3 minutes. If for certain SAP systems, you know, it might be slower, might be a good idea to increase the timeout. Just give Control-M, or give SAP a little bit more time to respond back to Control-M. They use extended, the function modules. The XBP function modules, there are certain tasks or functions that XBP does not provide. So BMC wrote some extended functions. I'm going to give you some information a little bit later on in the tips slide about what specific functions there are. Typically, most people do not use the extended modules. If you do know that you need to use these, we need to actually select yes here, but then install those modules on the SAP side. Again, the SAP Administrator Guide, Control-M for SAP Administrator Guide is going to give you information on exactly how to do that. And then finally, the Solution Manager. SAP, like Control-M, you can view documentation about individual jobs. And so they have a Solution Manager, which is basically the conduit for that. If you know, if you're an SAP administrator, or if you know that you have the ability to use this function, then you'd first create a profile and select this checkbox, and that's the information that connects to that Solution Manager. And then in your other accounts, other profiles, you'd select that or the whatever appropriate profile from this drop down here. So finally then, you go ahead and just obviously test the connection, just making sure that the login and the host name and all that information is correct, that SAP system supports XBP3 or the chosen version. So we've got a version, or we've got our profile, and we can finish that up. So we see our new BW profile here. One of the things to note here in the profile list is the state column. So periodically, Control-M is going to check the status of an account, of a profile, and just make sure that that SAP system is still reachable. If it's not, we're going to set it to unavailable. That way, jobs are not submitting to that SAP system and failing. Rather, they're going to go blue and remain in a resource unavailable. And you can check and see that when you do a Y in the job, it's going to show you that that particular account's unavailable. All right, I wanted to look at some of the configuration information. I'm not going to talk about all of these. These are definitely documented in the Administrator Guide, but some of the common ones that are used most often, the load balancing algorithm. When we submit jobs to SAP, SAP can then determine what application server it actually wants to submit that job on. And so XAL is one of the newer load balancing algorithms that is available. It checks for CPU and memory and balances based upon that. But not all SAP systems, though, support XAL, and there are times when we're looking at the proc log directory on the Control M agent where the logs are stored, the CM SAP logs specifically might show messages that say something like could not calculate target server. So what that means is that SAP system is not supporting XAL. So if you're seeing things like that, we want to come back here and set the algorithm back to SAP default. It's not a problem if that is set to XAL and it's not supported. We're going to go ahead and use SAP default through Control M, but it just means less work for Control M if it's not having to calculate something that's not actually in use. Another one I want to talk about is the enable RFC trace, library trace. So typically if support instructs you to turn on some debug when troubleshooting an issue, usually that's going to be on the agent. We're going to set the debug to 4. But there are some occasions where we want to check the connections between the Java connector and SAP itself, and so we'd have you come in and select this option. The log spool max size, very important for R3 jobs specifically. When we submit the job to SAP, that log and spool we can bring back to Control M based upon parameters that you can set in the job definition. But sometimes SAP jobs might have some problems, and so the log and spool might get to be very large. And when we have to bring up that large amount of information back to Control M, that can cause delays with tracking the job, the job that might have the large spool or other jobs as well. So it's often a good idea to set this maximum size to some smaller value, maybe only as high as 5 megabytes might be a good idea. That way, if we're trying to potentially pull back large amounts of data, we're going to limit that so we're not causing delays on the Control M side. If a job does happen to run and has larger than whatever limit you set to, the sysout then is just going to show that the log was too large and the spool was not brought back. Okay, I wanted to move on to creating a couple jobs then, just to give you a look and feel for what some of the parameters are in the job definitions, and also just to give you a chance to see version 8 if you haven't had a chance. The workload automation client here is where we create jobs, also monitor them, so there's not a separate Control M desktop and Control M GUI. It's all in one tool now. So to create jobs, this what we call the domain panel here on the left side is the planning domain is now the equivalent of Control M desktop, so this is where we create jobs. And similarly, we have workspaces. So I'll go ahead and create a blank workspace here. And then this job palette here on the upper left is where we select the different types of jobs and drag them into our workspace to determine what jobs we want to create. So I'm going to drag a business warehouse BW job here. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the version 8 client, the plugins and forms that we use to create jobs and communicate with SAP come pre-installed, so reduces the implementation there quite a bit. So the folder name used to be named the Smart Folder or Smart Table, or in older versions. I want to go ahead and change that, just make that a little more appropriate for our demo here. In version 8, we used to have tabs across the top. We've simplified that a bit here, but there's no longer going to be an SAP tab. There'll be a details button that we click here, and this will give us the same form that we saw earlier. So with process chains and info packages, these are actually only created on the SAP side, and then we can reference them within Control M. So we'll go ahead and load the particular account that we just created, our BW account, and that's where we're going to pull this set of jobs from. I'll go ahead and load. This will give us a list of the different jobs that are available. I'm just going to pull up a simple process chain here. When a process chain is a group of linked chain of different SAP entities, ABAP programs, events, triggers, that kind of thing. So they can get quite large. If one of those process chains does fail for some reason, we have an option to either rerun from the point of failure or rerun from the beginning. The advanced options, important here for process chains. Again, we talked about retrieving the log. So with larger chains, if you know that it's going to retrieve a huge log that you really don't need to look at from the Control M side, you'll still be able to view it from the SAP side. You can deselect the retrieve log option. Also for larger process chains, SAP has problems checking the status of all the different steps when Control M or other third parties request the status. So they've created this option to check only the overall status of the chain. That way, sometimes you might see larger process chains go into a disappeared state in Control M. And again, that's because SAP is not able to provide us that status back in a timely manner. So we time out that connection. So you can select this option here so that we check only the overall status of that chain rather than try to get everything about that chain. Okay, so let's go. I just want to change the name of this job here to be a little more appropriate. All right, let's go ahead and order this job. Right-click on that and order it out. I'm going to ignore the criteria. And now that particular workspace that we worked with is now checked out, and then the job's been ordered. So while that job's running, it's going to take a few minutes. I want to go ahead and create another job. So I need to check out our workspace again so that we have it available. And then again in our palette, I'm going to choose an R3 job this time and drag that into our SAP demo table and rearrange that to make it look a little bit easier. So again, no tab here. We'll just pull up the R3 attributes this time and on the details button. SAP gives us different modes as far as how we create R3 jobs. We can create our own R3 job with ABAP programs. We can copy. We can run an original version of a job. We talked about the function modules earlier as well, and some of the extended functionality, and batch input is an example of one of those. So if you know that you're going to use batch input as a job mode type, then this would be an instance to install those function modules, the extended modules, that is. So for example, I'm just going to copy an existing job. Again, we need to load our account. This time, though, I'm going to choose a different account, just an R3 account. You can filter to choose specific kinds of jobs. I'm just going to choose a certain subset of jobs here. So this is going back to SAP, getting the list of jobs that are available. We talked about load balancing. The execution target, we can choose a server or a group. Group is where load balancing comes in. The servers or groups are defined on the SAP side by your administrator. So I can choose to load the different servers or groups that are available to me. In this case, there's only one, so I'm not going to select it. If you leave it blank, SAP is going to decide what application server to submit this specific job to. SAP also gives us different start conditions for the jobs. If you want to submit the job ASAP, then we're going to submit it to SAP. If there's an available background process on the application server, it's going to go ahead and submit it. If there's not, it's going to wait until there is one. If you happen to select immediate, then if there's not a background process available, the job is going to error out, and we'll see that back in Control M. After event, another example of extended functionality. Again, I'm going to get in our tips slide here a little bit later on. I'm going to give you a knowledge article that we can look at to see exactly what the different I believe there's 5 different extended functions, but after event is one of those. We can choose a specific instance of a job to run, the first or last execution of a job on the SAP side, or the first or last successfully scheduled instance of this particular job. So I'm going to choose the last schedule. If you want to view the different steps, go ahead and select that. This is a simpler job, so it just has one step with some variance to it. Once the job completes in SAP, again, we have the option to bring that log or spool back to Control-M. This is another example if you happen to know where there's a large R3 job and there's really no reason to bring the log or the spool back to Control-M. You can go ahead and select the Don't Copy option just so that we're not bringing so much information back to Control-M and causing delays. We had talked about the Solution Manager. If you wanted to view job documentation from the SAP system, you'd select that option here. Since we didn't define that for any of our accounts, then that's not going to be available to us here. Finally, for R3 jobs, we can detect spawn jobs. Again, these are jobs that are where a parent creates other child spawn jobs. So for example, if this R3 rec job was a parent and it created child jobs and we wanted to detect those in SAP and bring them back, because by default we're only running this parent, we're not going to bring back the child jobs. We could choose to detect those spawn jobs. Those spawn jobs then need a template for how we bring them and create them in Control-M. That template can either be the parent or it could be another specific job definition. If it were a specific job, then you just put that job name here. Typically what most people are going to do if they detect spawn jobs is the parent job itself you're going to create within a smart folder or smart table, and then the specific job is also going to be in that smart folder. That way when those jobs come back, they'll all be grouped in one logical entity, and you can control them with conditions and resources quite a bit easier. Let's go ahead and save that job, and again we're going to order that one out. Just order it now. And rather than going to another tool, the EM GUI, we can go to this monitoring domain here to the left, and we'll see that our jobs that in our viewpoint. So these are the particular jobs that we submitted earlier. Here's our process chain. If we click on that, we can just go straight over here, look at the output in this window, or if you need to, you can right-click and just select output that way. So here we see this is the output that's coming back. This is the log coming back from SAP, formatted very similar to what you see in SAP as well. For process chains, if you right-click and go into Properties, and then we can go into the attributes, the detailed attributes for the BW job, we'll see the different steps of this chain and in what state they are. So in our case, we see that they're all finished. But if one failed, you could come here and see the specific step that it failed on the SAP side, and if need be, give that information back to your SAP administrator, and they can take care of that chain. For our R3 job, similarly, we can right-click and look at the output and see that our one step finished here successfully. Again, similar look and feel that you might see from the SAP side. All right, that's the end of the demo, and I'd like to go ahead and switch back to our slides. So let me go ahead and do that. Some of the things we talked about earlier, XBP3, again, these are the function modules that we use to interact with SAP. Highly recommend using XBP3 when possible, if that SAP system supports it. The JCO, the latest that comes from SAP, is version 309. Definitely recommend grabbing that version. There are some things that with FixPack 2 of Control-M for SAP that we take advantage of. And so having both XBP3 and 309 lets us take advantage of that. We talked about the configuration management, potentially limiting the log spool max size to 5 megabytes or less, something that you can play with, but if you might be seeing delays because of large log coming back from an R3 job, then this is one way to do it here, or again, back in the individual job definition. We talked about the load balancing algorithm. This knowledge article, the 353835 that you can find in the knowledge base at bmc.com, gives us information, again, about the types of messages that you might see in the proc log directory on the agent. For those of you that are using AIX on the Control-M agent, AIX limits individual processes, the memory to those, so if you're submitting quite a few jobs and either noticing delays or the tracker might be having some problems, this knowledge article, the 349663, can give you good information about setting that in AIX itself. Talked about process chains disappearing. This knowledge article gives you information about how to check and see whether this parameter, this I don't poll parameter, is actually enabled in SAP. This is an SAP thing. They're noticing problems with getting back the status of larger process chains. So they implemented this, and then the consider only overall chain status parameter that we saw in the Control-M job is taking advantage of that SAP capability. The extended function modules. This article talks, again, gives you a little bit more information about the 5 different extensions that we provide beyond XBP. So a good resource to see if you need that. The profiles accounts that we create, if you happen to know, because if you happen to know that one might be down or is no longer valid, it's a good idea to either disable that or delete it. If one might be down for a few days, rather than letting Control-M continue to ping these, then it might be a good idea to go into disable it. And then, so back in that list of the profiles and the accounts, if you just right-click on the account and select disable, that's how we handle that. So also for larger environments, if you're running thousands of jobs, often a good idea to use more than one Control-M for SAP installation. Put it on several different agents. Might be a good idea to run certain kinds of jobs on one agent, potentially R3 jobs on one agent, or process chains or critical process chains on one, and then other process chains on another. And you can also use node groups from the Control-M side. Lets you do some load balancing from the Control-M side to those multiple agents that you've got installed to. All right. Would like to thank you very much for taking time out of your day to learn about Control-M for SAP. You can access the administrator guide or the support site on this shortened link here to get some more detailed information about some of the things that we talked about. Our next Control-M Connect with Control-M webinar is going to be in May 15th specifically, talking about Control-M self-service, so highly recommend taking a look at that. This event here is recorded as well as, and will be placed on the on-demand link that you see here, as well as you can go back and see the old recordings as well for different topics if you happen to miss those. You'll be getting a survey after this session, and definitely welcome your feedback on how we can improve this session, future sessions, and what you'd like to see for future topics as well. Also, please go ahead and follow us on the different social media sites, Twitter, Facebook, BMC communities.